Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello, this is another wonderful presentation today of Will Work for Food, the New Possibilities Hour. Today is May 22nd, 2025, and we are honored to have with us Taeler Paige Hammond, who will be speaking to us on the psychology of conflict, why we fight, and how we fix it. But before I introduce you to Taeler, let's get to that part that Jeff always says he loves the most. How much our wonderful audiences have told us that they have contributed to food banks around the world. Today is probably our 5-year anniversary presentation, this week or last week. And everybody has been so generous. As you all know, there is no charge for these programs. Rather, we ask that if you are able, that you make a donation to either the food bank that has been suggested by the speaker, or whoever you want to make a donation to. Feeding the world, feeding your mind. So with that, Jeff, do you want to do the honors on how much we've brought in so far?
Thank you so much, Jean. I'm delighted to announce the number. It is $814,155.73. Thank you all so much, our generous audiences and our great speakers. Jean, back to you.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, so as I told you today, we have Taeler Paige Hammond with us. Her food bank, and she will mention it to you a little bit later, just tell you a little something about it, but it's Food Cycle LA. Natalie will put the link to that in the chat as an option for where to donate. And if you are uh, able to donate, whether during the presentation or sometime during the week or whenever, middle of the night, if you just let Natalie, Jeff, myself, David know, then we will be happy to add it to our running total. Okay, thank you so much. So Taeler is an industrial organizational psychologist, speaker, trainer, and consultant. She's dedicated to transforming workplace cultures through change management. She has a reputation as an empowering leader. She supports companies and top executives with a unique perspective, as well as a real appreciation for human capital. And she's sought after both as a speaker, a facilitator, and as an advice giver, consultant to help businesses, to help people, basically, because conflict, why we fight and how we fix it. She will be telling us today about the psychological aspects, which means that she is a psychologist. She received her bachelor's degree in psychology from Roosevelt University in Chicago, 2012, and her master's degree in industrial organizational psychology from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, also in Chicago, in 2019. And she holds certifications in mental health, first aid, diversity and inclusion, change management, and board leadership. Actively involved in many professional networks. She's truly a Renaissance woman. She sits on boards, and you can see her full and lengthy bio on the website for Will Work for Food. And willworkforfood.news is the website for the New Possibilities Hour. We invite you to go there if you haven't ever before, or go back and visit again and see all the wonderful speakers we've had and will have, and you can learn more about Taeler. That said, Taeler, I think it's time to turn it over to you. You'll tell us about the psychology of conflict, why we fight, and how to fix it. And if you might mention just something briefly about Food Cycle LA, will be great.
Of
Thank you.
course. Thank you, Jean. All right, good morning, everyone. So again, my name is Taeler Hammond. I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm really looking forward to today's content. Just a little bit about Food Cycle LA. They are a food bank in the Los Angeles area, and they help people in a way that allows them to still feel empowered, to feel that they have support, and to feel that they have a place to go that's friendly, that's got great options, that doesn't just give them, things that they don't just need, but things that they want as well. And they have options to join their local food bank, either to be a receiver or a giver. You can do this on Eventbrite, where you can find more information about Food Cycle LA. Now, in today's presentation, as Jean mentioned, we are going to be talking about the psychology of conflict, why we fight, and how we fix it. So we're going to dive into our introduction in just a moment, and this is an interactive presentation. So I am going to give you all a chance to tell me a little bit about what you think about conflict in the next few moments. But today we're going to be discussing why conflict happens. So this is going to talk about the human side of disagreement. Then we're going to discuss the role of emotion in high stakes conversations. And this is going to talk a bit about what's behind why we are reacting the way that we do when it comes to encountering conflict. Then we're going to discuss reactive to reflective. And that is going to be a place where you can kind of do a little bit of deep dive within yourself to think about how you may have reacted to certain situations and reflect on those actions. Then we'll talk about repair, not just resolution, which enables us to create a resolution for a conflict and repair any hurt feelings. And last but not least, we'll discuss tools for policy-driven people leaders, which is going to be tools for all of us, not just necessarily people leaders. Now, before we go any further, I do want to discuss what the psychology of conflict is. Now, the psychology of conflict is basically the psychology of understanding why conflict happens, what happens in our minds when we encounter conflict. Now, in the psychology of conflict, it seeks to understand what people are processing mentally when we're going through a conflict. And what that means is that we're just trying to understand what is going through that person's head. How does this person navigate this conflict, and what are the ways that they seek to resolve it? Now, this image here, as Jean has so kindly given me a book on AI leadership, was generated by AI. And I want you all to pay attention to this image because not only does it talk about the ways that conflict can create this internal knot. I'm sure that you all have felt that knot in your gut when you encounter a conflict and you're feeling nervous or uncertain about how to navigate it. But the different colors interwoven in this knot also talk about, or help me to see, that conflict can come in many different shades. It can come in many different shapes, forms, and the like. And what we need to do is know how to address that conflict no matter what it looks like. Now, we're going to get into why conflict happens and the human side of that disagreement. So what is conflict? I'm sure we all know. We have a general idea of what conflict is, right? But per the dictionary, okay, this is the official definition. So to have conflict is to come into some sort of collision or some sort of disagreement, or, there's a contradictory issue coming up. There's some sort of variance. Someone is opposed to what you're saying. You've reached an impasse. Basically, you're clashing because you can't agree and move forward. So when we think about what conflict really means, it doesn't have to mean that the person that you disagree with is bad or that they have ill intent. But really what it means is that you may have opposing views. And in order to navigate that conflict and reach a resolution, you have to understand the why behind the opposition. Now, here's a place where you can become a little bit more involved here in our presentation. Now, if you are able to, and I see it's an option on mine, you can use your annotate feature here and drop something into this little thought bubble about what comes to your mind when you hear the word annotate. And you can also use your chat function for this as well. Don't be shy. All I want you to do is just think about the word conflict, just overarching term. What comes to your mind when you hear conflict? Is it trouble? Is it opposition? Is it arguing? Just think about that for a moment. What comes to your mind when you hear the word conflict? Okay, I see some chats coming in. Tension, disagreement. Yes, misalignment, though not necessarily adversarial. I appreciate that comment. Stress. Okay. Loss of control. Thank you all for participating. All right. Anger, mediation. Yes, we're going to talk about that too. All right. Resistance. Ooh, that's such a good one. Lawsuit. Yes. All right. Yes. Challenges, non-communication. Ooh, thank you all. Okay, yes, these are all great. Yes, this is exactly what we're talking about. There's so many challenges that we can encounter when enduring a conflict. So when we're going through that conflict and we're trying to navigate, yes, misalignment. Thank you for putting your thought in the bubble. And so when we're talking about this, we have to figure out why that person disagrees with us. Or in the comment about resistance, what is making that person resist what we're saying? Could it be something that they went through in the past, something that has nothing to do with us? Could it be a projection of some sort? Could it even be PTSD? I mean, we really don't know, right? So we have to navigate conflicts carefully, and we have to be understanding of what the other person is saying and why they may be disagreeing with us. All right. Now, um, my admin folks who are helping out there, if you wouldn't mind clearing the annotation here, I appreciate you. Thank you. Conflict styles. So when we're talking about conflict, we're not only talking about the things that we just named, right? But we're also going to be talking about the different styles of conflict in general. Now, I've taken this chart from some folks who are wiser than I in conflict, and I've put those things in our slide deck in an appendix, so you can read them later if you like. Now, we're talking about avoidance. And now this is something that we all may be guilty of. And, I'm not ashamed to say that I'm guilty of this as well. But avoidance is just one style of navigating conflict. And what it means is to essentially delay or sidestep or, even pretend that the problem is not existing right now. And when it's useful, now, this is for low stakes issues, things that may not necessarily have something to directly do with you. And it allows you to take some time to pause and take a step back from the issue itself. And then it allows you to come and think about what's going on, collect your feelings, not overreact. And it allows you to have a little bit more control over the situation. But avoidance can also have you disengaged. It can also lead to procrastination of repairing the actual issue, and it can cause further tension with the other party because they may feel that you're ignoring them, and that's not what we want to do. Another style of conflict is accommodating. So this style comes with preserving harmony. Now, for those of us who are, psychology buffs like myself, the accommodating conflict style comes in with people pleasing. This is something that we may want to do to just, not cause any tension, to, we don't want to have any trouble. We want to make sure that things are just, flowing smoothly, and we want to avoid conflict if we can. It kind of stems a little bit from avoidance, but it goes a step further to accommodate what that other person may be asking of you and what they may be upset about. Now, this is useful for maintaining relationships, as I said. So it allows that other person to feel that you are seeing their side. You're wanting to please them. You're wanting to get along with them. But there are other issues that can come along with this on your end as the accommodator. So just make sure that if you are this accommodating conflict style, that you're careful not to develop that resentment in your mind because you focused on pleasing the other person and not expressing your own feelings. So this comes along with suppressing your own wants and needs, which can lead to resentment in the future, which can eventually harm that relationship. Now, competing conflict styles is more along the lines of asserting your position. And this can come in, this is important when it's a really urgent decision and you just feel that you have to make a decision. You have to get something done. And there are boundaries that must be set. There are safety policies that must be followed. There are things that must be adhered to. But there's a caveat. So this can escalate the conflict. This can make the other party feel that they are not seen. This can lead to making them feel that they can't trust you or that you're not interested in what they have to say, which can lead to burning bridges, and that does not repair the relationship. Now, a compromising conflict style is where you find the middle ground. That's more of that even playing field. Now, it does offer a resolution that allows for maybe a more quicker, resolution because you're offering to work with that person. You're offering to work together to find common ground, to meet in the middle. You can agree to disagree if you need to, but you need to work through this to compromise and find a way to end the conflict, which is preparing you for more talking. It's going to feel as though you're reaching a point where you both can win. Now, here you do have to watch out for the fact that you may be sacrificing some core needs in order to resolve the conflict that comes with the compromise. Each party may be giving up something. And last but not least, that collaboration piece. So a step ahead of compromising, collaborating. So you're working together on high stakes issues. You're building that trust. You're repairing that relationship. You're making it so that each person feels seen. They feel that their problem is being acknowledged and addressed and that their opinion is appreciated. Now, the collaborating aspect is more of the time-consuming conflict style. It goes into deeper conversation. It requires more trust, which is going to take more time to build. And of course, it allows that person to be more open with you, which again takes more time because you're building that rapport. All right. Now, before I get into the fight, flight, or freeze, I want you all to think about a time where you have had to encounter a conflict and it's been something scary. It may have been something that you weren't necessarily familiar with. So think about what's actually happening in your brain at that time. Now, when you're thinking about what's happening in your brain, you can put that in the chat here for me. I see that you all are still putting things in there and I appreciate that. Now, when we're thinking about what is happening in the brain, and no, Laura, these are not necessarily in hierarchical order. When we're thinking about what's actually happening in the brain, the amygdala, so we're getting back into our psychology stuff. Now we're getting into neuro. Exciting, right? So the amygdala scans for danger. All right. So whether it is real or perceived danger, your brain is scanning for danger. It wants to protect you. So when we're encountering something that's new and scary, your brain is trying to examine that to see, is it safe? Right? So when we're thinking about these things, we're thinking about, you know, is this something that is okay to navigate? Is this something that's safe to proceed? What are my next steps? Now, fight or flight is the typical thing that we're used to hearing, but there's also freeze. So I've added a little picture of those cute little goats that freeze and fall out when they get scared, just so you have that reference. So fight or flight, arguing, interrupting, and defending. So this is our fight response in the brain. Now, flight, that means that you've decided not to tussle with this person, whether it's emotional or physical. You're going to avoid the conflict, you're withdrawing, you're running away, you're changing the subject to get off topic and de-escalate the situation. Now, freeze goes into a different part of our brain where we kind of go blank, right? When we're encountering something that's really scary, we may shut down. We may just stop altogether. We may just try to appease that person so that we don't have to fight or flight. We might just try to, de-escalate things. Another thing about freezing is that unlike these goats here, we may not, freeze up and fall over. But what may happen is that we may go into a shutdown mode where we feel that we can't talk, we can't move, we can't really process anything because our brain may feel like it's frozen, like everything is swirling in our minds and we're not quite sure what to do or how to proceed. In instances like that, it's okay to take that pause and really take a second, decompress, think about what's really going on. Are we really in danger? What is the best next course of action? And then just a note here, your brain reacts the same way to a toxic email as it does to a grizzly bear. So think about that next time you're sending an unfriendly email to someone. You don't want to be the grizzly bear, right? At least I hope not. I hope that's not what we're doing on this call. All right. We're going to dive into types of conflict in organizations. Now, this is going to be a little bit different than our typical fight, flight, or freeze, and it's going to be different than the conflict styles that I mentioned a couple slides ago, because this is the type of conflict styles in organizations. So these are things that you're going to be seeing at work. These are things that you may be seeing happening throughout the organization, and you need to understand what your next best step is here. Like, you want to understand, is this something I need to be a part of? Is this something that I need to watch from the sidelines? Is this something that I really need to think about? Is this something that is personal to me? Now, we'll talk a little bit about each one. And if you have some comments in the chat about how you have navigated these, feel free to put them in and share. So first we'll talk about the task. Now, this is something that is basically a disagreement about what needs to be done and how it should be done. And this is something that can happen quite often in organizations. As we may see at work, we have a diverse group of minds in the boardroom. We have a lot of different opinions at the table, lots of different hands in the pot for each project. Sometimes we may not always agree on how to navigate that project, and that's okay. But what has to happen is we need to come together to think about the best way to do it, how to incorporate the best ideas, how to let everyone get out their opinion, and how to put them all together to create a positive solution to move forward and be most productive. So what we need to focus on here is just making sure that we're not letting any, power dynamics get in the way. And when I say power dynamics, that means that if there's upper level management in the way, or excuse me, not in the way, but in the room, and they're sharing their ideas, and you may not be upper level management yet, it's okay to still share your idea. Don't be afraid to share just because they may have a higher title than you. It doesn't mean that their idea is any better or worse than yours. Everyone's idea is still valuable and deserves to be shared. And we also can't let our ego get in the way, meaning that if we think that, John or Susan has shared a particular idea and their idea is great, mine may not be as great. Don't be afraid to be wrong, because your idea could spark something in their minds that they could play on that and continue to work on your idea with you. And for all you know, you can combine your ideas or use both, use multiple, whatever the case may be. Now, relational conflict in organizations is a little bit different because this is interpersonal friction rather than actual work content. So this is not really, saying you don't know why this project wasn't done. I disagreed with William on why, we weren't going to put X first instead of Y, blah, 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 blah. It's not that. This is more so of, colleagues not necessarily getting along, or it's that certain members of the team feel that they are not being treated fairly, and that's causing some sort of friction that can lead to disengagement and lack of productivity, because now they're focused on resenting you or certain other team members rather than the actual work itself. And this is causing more friction than needed, because sometimes we can talk these things out and make them better instead of continuing to let them fester. So features of this and possible solutions, again, is talking things out, having an open door policy, allowing people to feel psychologically safe in the workplace where they can share ideas, where they can feel that they are not micromanaged or, put behind the scenes on purpose. Now, identity-based conflict is a little bit different as well, because this focuses on the conflict that touches on core aspects of a person's self-concept. So when we talk about identity-based conflict, this is something that is more personal to that person and more unique to them. And it could be things like race or gender, religion, sexual orientation, the way that they present themselves, certain beliefs, so on. So when we think about things like this, I have a little example for you. So as you may see from my background, I have a bit of experience in compliance. So when we think about if a certain compliance officer were asked to lead an employee resource group and they felt tokenized because they may be the only compliance officer that looks like they do, and they've been asked to lead this group. So just think about how a certain ask could make someone feel and could then create conflict. So we also have to think about our own actions when we're thinking about conflict. We have to be accountable for the things that we say and do that could cause conflict later down the line. Right? Okay. So next we're going to jump into cognitive biases. Now, this is talking about why we misjudge and can, sometimes misread others. Now, when we're thinking about this, this is thinking about what we do when we are thinking about another person's attributes. This can also lead into unconscious bias. We're not going to get into that in this presentation. But basically, what I wanted to touch on here is that we can take away that judgment and helping others to feel as though they are misunderstood or being put in a box or labeled by not making assumptions. Another thing that I want to touch on here is that you may see what you expect to see. So if you go into a situation assuming that you're going to see one thing, it can become a sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy here. We are almost speaking it into existence, into our mind. If we believe that we're going to see a certain thing, it can warp our internal lens, creating a conflict where there needn't be one. I taught a class last year about biases and how these things can warp us mentally. And what that means is that if we're thinking that, everything is bad, we're going into a situation with a negative outlook. We know that things are going to be bad. We're thinking that everything is going to be trash. It's going to be a terrible day, and the team is not going to know anything. They're not going to be able to do this. They're not going to be able to do that. I'm going to mess up. We're basically speaking that over the situation, and we needn't. We don't have to do that. We can focus on going into a situation open-minded without thinking that there's going to be a conflict. We don't have to prepare for an argument where there doesn't have to be one. And that goes into rehearsing things in our mind, because I know I'm guilty of this, but when I think that there's going to be an issue, I'm rehearsing in my head what that other person might say. This could be completely wasted energy. So when I'm thinking about fundamental attributes, this is when we're basically blaming other people's behavior on their character. but then we blame our behavior on our circumstance. So you see how that's unfair? So we have to give other people the benefit of the doubt, right? We have to make sure that we approach things fairly. And that's how we can mitigate some of these conflicts. That's how we can reduce some of the impact of these emotional reactions. And then confirmation bias. Now, this is when we seek out information that confirms what we already believe. And that's what I was touching on a little bit ago, where I was saying that if we're going into a situation and we believe it's negative, we believe that this person doesn't know what they're talking about, or we believe they're a bad person, we may start seeking out opinions of other people in the room and bring them into the drama and bring them into a conflict that they didn't ask to be a part of. And what that would do is we would start saying, tap another person on the shoulder. Well, did you see what Alex did the other day? Can you believe that? Aren't they a bad person? What did they do to you? And maybe they don't even know Alex like that. So we should leave other people out of those conflicts, go into situations with an open mind, remove the bias from the situation, and go into things where we are allowing the other person to share and not attach what behavior they're displaying in the moment to explain who they are as a person. All right. So in our next section here, we're going to go into the role of emotion in high stakes conversation. Now, this can also touch on confidence building strategies, how to navigate your emotions, um, what to do when you're feeling that reaction bubbling up because you may be trying to interpret what someone is saying in a particular conversation. All right. Now, emotions can turn conflict into something huge when it doesn't have to be that. Now, this could be something that is super small. This could be something that's just a little minor annoyance, but emotions can turn something into a huge deal that doesn't have to be. And so when we think about how emotions can turn conflict into something that's small and minute, into something that is life changing, we have to look at the way that the person may be coming into the conversation. So here we're going to talk about the way that conflict can escalate. So first we're going to talk about the physiological escalation because we already talked about fight or flight. So we're going to talk about that first. So the physiological escalation is when a person feels triggered. So when the person feels triggered, you may not know what their triggers are, but it can make them become defensive when something comes up in a conversation, or it can make them become aggressive. And either one, that's not a reaction that we want. It's an impulsive reaction that can turn the conversation into something that you didn't mean for it to turn into. And when we think about that, again, when we're, having a conversation in conflict, we're trying to express our feelings, but we're also trying to stay focused on the facts. And when we focus on the facts, it allows us to not focus as heavily on the emotional part of the conflict. But we do have to acknowledge the fact that this person may be coming into the conversation with some sort of emotion, which is probably which led to the conflict in the first place. Now, cognitive escalation is a little bit different because this is where we misinterpret what someone has said. This is when we may see the person as the problem instead of the problem on its own. And that's kind of what I talked about in the last slide, where we attach a behavior to a person and we start thinking that this angry behavior is now just an angry person. They're angry all the time. Not necessarily. So this also allows us to go down what I call a doom loop. And that goes into when we only see the worst case scenario. And that means that when we get into a conflict and we're talking about the conflict in conversation, our emotions may have taken over at this point because maybe we thought that that person completely disagreed with us. They think that our opinion is irrelevant or wrong. And now we're on the defense. We think that we're no longer going to be able to work together. we're going to get fired, so and so is going to lose their job, blah 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 blah. It's just it's basically a plane crash of emotions. Now, behavioral escalation. This is also known as reciprocal negative reactions. So this goes a step further than cognitive escalation because this is now like a retaliatory action and it involves tit for tat. So if you start thinking about a certain argument that you may have had with someone and they start imitating you or they start saying that, well, I'm going to get you back for this, or you go into that sort of thing. That is that behavioral escalation, and that's not where we want to go. So in this case, we want to bring that down because we don't want to have anyone escalate their behavior in a way that starts to become, triangular, which means they're pulling other people into the situation now. Again, we don't need to get other people involved in the conflict when they didn't ask to be and they weren't necessarily part of it in the first place. And we also want to make sure that we're not having them avoid things completely. We want to make sure that we're de-escalating instead of escalating when things start to get emotional in these conversations about the conflict. All right. So in our leadership roles, we're talking here about empathy versus sympathy. Now, this is something that is important to conflict because when you're a leader and a mitigation specialist, or you're thinking about trying to neutralize the conflict, or you're a mediator, any of these positions. If you're someone who is trying to de-escalate conflict and create a resolution, sometimes we have to let the people vent, let them get off what's on their chest, and let them say what they need to say. Because as someone who has worked claims for a very long time, when you think about you have a claimant on your line and they just can't get off their chest what they needed to say about the accident that they were in, they may not be willing to, take a seat at the table and discuss resolution or settlement because they're still focused on the problem. They haven't been able to express themselves. They don't feel heard. They don't feel like anyone gets what they're really going through. So, this is what we want to think about when we're going into those rooms. It's always a time to show sympathy, it's always a time to display empathy, and they are different. Sympathy is feeling for someone, and this can often be from a distance. Now, empathy is feeling with understanding. So it goes a step further. So if you think about it, an example of this would be sending someone a sympathy card that's feeling for them. You've put it in the mail, it's from a distance, you sent them the card. You're hoping, praying, thoughts, wishes, whatever. Empathy is feeling with understanding. This is going a step further because it's talking about actually being in that situation with that person, talking them through it, hearing them out. You don't necessarily have to, you know, internalize what they may be going through, but it's showing that you understand and it's letting them get off their chest what they need to. Now, I did put a reference at the end of this presentation about nonviolent communication, and I do want to touch a little bit about this because this is something that we may want to think about when we're discussing communication in conflict. So, this stems from really understanding what the person needs and what they're going through. It allows you to observe what you are seeing and hearing without necessarily evaluating. So again, it talks about going into a situation indifferent. You're going in with a clean slate, an open mind, just to observe what may be happening. Then when you're thinking about feelings, nonviolent communication allows you to express what you feel in response to what you observed. So this is a little bit different because you're not necessarily responding to every particular thing. And we don't have to do this all at once when we're communicating. We don't need to respond to everything. Just express how you're feeling in response to what you actually observe, not he said, she said. Now, then we get into needs, which identify the needs related to the feelings that you expressed. And then request, which actually make a clear, specific request about addressing the needs that you shared. Okay, so again, communication is something that's super important when understanding the psychological aspect of conflict, because if we're not properly communicating, we're not understanding what that person is saying, and they're not understanding what we're saying.
Excuse
Okay,
me, Taylor, can you give an example of that and how it might come up in a typical conversation?
yeah, of course. So when I'm thinking about an example of nonviolent communication, I'm thinking about expressing what I may have observed in a certain person's behavior. Earlier this year, I did a talk on um, self-limiting behavior. And in that talk, we discussed how to identify limits that we put on ourselves and limits that others have put on themselves. If you think about the nonviolent communication example for self-limiting behavior, if I saw someone preventing themselves from excelling because they were standing in their own way for whatever reason, I can observe what I saw without evaluating or judging that person. I can express how I felt about the limit that was put on myself or that other person put on themselves. I can express the need to grow to that person without making them feel as though it's a judgment or a slap on the hand or some sort of negative commentary about them. And then I would be able to then make the request that we remove this limit that may have been put on us by some form of past trauma or some fear or something else that we may be projecting onto the situation.
So again, let's say I'm that person and that I have a self-limiting belief that I'm really over my head and I got to where I am because of some family connection or something like that. What would you actually say?
What I would actually say is to remove the thought from your head about that you only got there because of the family connection, and to think about the role that you play in this particular job. Not thinking about how you got there, but thinking about what you're actually doing in the current moment, thinking about how you're qualified for this, thinking about what is the reason that you're still there. You may have gotten there from the family connection, but you're still there, which means that you're more than qualified and can continue to do that plus more. That's what I would say to that person.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. All right. So we're going to talk about de-escalation with EQ. So EQ being emotional intelligence. Now, I always recommend to leaders that we lead with emotional intelligence and not ego. And this is important because when we're leading with emotional intelligence, it allows us to not only be kind to the other person, but it shows that other person that we understand what we're going through and that we see the emotion that they're displaying in that moment. We get how they're feeling. Now, a way to de-escalate conflict is to use curiosity as your tool. So instead of approaching a conflict with accusatory statements, we can approach a conflict with curiosity. So this means that we would be asking open-ended questions. We would be curious about what makes the other person feel the way that they do. Instead of pointing fingers, we're we're asking questions. We're diving into the problem. We're trying to unpack whatever it is that has created this conflict in the first place. Another thing that allows us to de-escalate is to address emotions and label them. And this is just a way of saying that, this person feels angry. Well, why? This person feels angry because da 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 da. This person feels sad because da 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 da. It's important to understand why the emotion is there. What led this person to this emotion? We don't always just, wake up in the morning and we're sad and there's no reason behind it. Like there has to be a reason, and we label what that reason is along with the emotion so that we can address it properly. Again, this is another tip about that pause. The pause in a conversation is powerful. The pause allows you to take a step back. It allows your brain to decompress so you don't have to go into fight, flight, or freeze. It allows you to really unpack what's going on and understand how you want to move forward, how you want to properly answer the question so that you don't escalate something. It allows you to properly express what you're feeling in that moment without making things awkward, without making things worse, and by saying what you actually mean. And that may not be, the first thing that comes to mind, but you may be able to express yourself in a better way. All right. So we're going to dive into reactive to reflective. And again, this is a section that's going to really talk about how to reflect on your emotions and your actions in conflict. And when we're thinking about our power in this section, we're thinking about what it means to be reflective instead of reactive. And this will allow you to really do more of a deep dive into what got you into this conflict in the first place. So starting out here, we're going to talk about reframing the conflict. So this is like, what else could be true? So when we think about a conflict, we may be only thinking about our side of the argument, but we should also think about what else could be happening in the situation. It may not be as black and white as what we're seeing. So we may have to think about what else could be going on that could be causing this other person to disagree with me. When we shift from what's wrong to what's happening, it allows us to focus on observing instead of interpreting. So again, when we observe, we go into something completely neutral. We're just watching. When we interpret, we're trying to make sense of that. And when we're trying to make sense of something, it's our opinion. It's us. We're trying to unpack whatever it is and we're trying to label it. And that's not a bad thing. Our brains are meant to see something, identify it, label it, and now that's what it is. It's put it into a category or a bucket of some sort. But when we go into something and we, are conscious of the fact that our brain may be trying to interpret something, think about that and take a step back in reflection. Just observe. So when we seek to understand before trying to be understood, this allows us to acknowledge our initial reaction. And again, we're asking open-ended questions so that we can understand the other person's perspective. And also by asking these open-ended questions, it shows that we are genuinely interested in what that other person is saying, and it allows them to feel a bit more calm now because they feel that you are genuinely trying to reach a resolution with them. And last but not least here, we want to look for commonalities in the conflict because we may be striving for the same goal. We could just be in disagreement of how to get there. When that happens, we want to, navigate that. We want to look for the goal. Then when we reframe the conflict to focus on the goal itself instead of how to get there, we can take a step back and say, instead of arguing about this, we both want the same thing. Let's come to the table and brainstorm to figure out how we can achieve this together. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about triggers. So imagine that triggers are basically emotional flashpoints. So once you push a button, if you think about an elevator, once you push a button, you can't unpush the button. The elevator is going to come up. It's no way to unpush this button. So that's how a trigger operates. Triggers can amplify conflict. So triggers can be as simple as, a tone of voice or certain words, gestures, or situations that may bring someone back to a certain point in their life where they experienced a conflict or a trauma that impacted them negatively. This can be, things like PTSD. This can be things that are suppressed memories or things in our, unconscious mind that are are lingering issues that could be unresolved. And when those triggers are brought about, they can make the conflict so much worse. So when we navigate these triggers, we can regain control of the situation where things have gotten out of control. And this is, again, talking about psychological safety, where we create a safe space for someone mentally, not just physically, but mentally, meaning that they are allowed to share what they need to. They're allowed to share an opinion. They're allowed to speak freely. They can, feel that they are not going to be judged or made fun of by sharing what they have to say. And then allowing all participants to speak and vent. This allows people to get out what they need to. When people aren't able to say what they have to say, they either, bottle it deep down and then it explodes, or they may, take it and let it fester and then it can come out later as a projection in that conflict. Now, avoiding known triggers is basically if you know that someone has a hit excuse me, a history of not doing well with certain situations and you purposely put them in that situation, then you have to understand that there's going to be a negative reaction here. And what you have done is basically caused this conflict now. So when we're pushing sensitive buttons on people, we have to understand that they are going to react in the way that they're going to react. And that's not helpful for the conflict at all. Excuse me. Okay. The ladder of interference. Now, this is a tool that I just wanted to put in here. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go deeply into it, but the ladder of interference is a tool that allows us to understand how thoughts, beliefs, and actions are formed based on the way that we interpret basically data, situations, emotions, so on. And so, as I stated earlier, the way that we interpret something may not necessarily be the way that it's meant to be interpreted, but the way that we interpret this can actually play a part in the way that we react. Now, the reflexive loop is also known as the feedback loop. And this is the way that our beliefs affect what data we select next time. So again, if a person has gone through something traumatic in their past, this reflexive loop may cause them to react differently the way, or excuse me, differently next time based on what they experienced last time. And that may not necessarily be a good thing, considering that you may not have the intent of them reacting that way in the particular conflict, which is why we have to navigate conflict carefully when we're speaking with others. All right, we're going to dive into the repair and not just resolution. So, when we're thinking about repair in conflict, what that means is that we're trying to create a some sort of fix. We want to acknowledge what the resolution means to all parties involved. And that comes along with talking things out, letting people say what they have to say. And then repair after harm is really when we're focused on the fix of the problem. And no, we can't always just make it go away. So we do have to be intentional about how we repair these issues. Now, when we are thinking about repairing the situation, we're thinking about restorative approaches to the way that we approach these policies, the way that we are fixing the conflict, and the way that we're integrating these values into our organization. So if there's an issue in an organization, we're thinking about the way that that value or that fix that we're aiming for is going to restore those feelings in the organization and bring about a solution, not just make it go away or push it up under the rug. That's not an answer. And of course, another thing that I want to touch on before I move on, dignity in dialogue. We want to make sure that the language that we use when we're speaking in conversation about conflict honors all parties. We don't want to make any disparaging comments that make someone feel less than or make someone reignite that anger that they had before, because that's not going to resolve the issue at all. It'll probably escalate things, and that's not what we want. All right. Again, psychological safety. I know you're getting a lot of psychological safety in this presentation. We're talking about embedding psychological safety into difficult conversations because this is actually something that allows us to let others speak freely without judgment and without feeling that they're going to make things worse. And what that does is that it actually creates more trust. It doesn't allow for threats. It doesn't allow for poking fun at someone else. It doesn't create judgment. It actually allows a person to vent, get off their chest what they need to, speak any ideas that they may have about resolution. Another thing that this does is it encourages accountability, and acknowledging that everyone makes mistakes is fundamental when we're thinking about conflict and how to resolve it. And when we think about the psychological aspect of conflict, it could be that the other person may be disagreeing with you, and they may have reached a point where they see a little bit about what you're saying, but maybe they don't want to be wrong. But we have to acknowledge the fact that everyone is wrong sometimes, and it's okay to be wrong. And normalize asking questions so that we can understand what the other person is saying or asking or requesting of us. And again, separating the person's behavior from their identity allows us to remove those negative feelings attached with the behavior that they may be displaying in the conflict itself. All right. And our last section here, tools for policy driven people leaders. The inner conflict compass. So, this is a tool that allows you to basically use your inner compass as your guide. And your inner conflict compass is going to really delve into the way that you navigate conflict, whether it's calmly, whether you're thinking about past issues or otherwise. Now, in the inner conflict compass, it has a few separate topics here that I'll dive into lightly in the interest of time. But inner conflict, this is when life presents a situation where our values and beliefs or desires can clash. And that's an internal inner conflict. But when we use our compass as our guide, that metaphor suggests that our inner values and our principles will take over and help us navigate the situation and help us to reach a positive solution with still being our authentic selves without having to pretend to be something we're not or care about something that we don't. And what this does is it allows us to focus on our values and find that calmness and tranquility without letting the conflict overtake us and overwhelm us. This also allows us to seek balance when we recognize that, our values can sometimes create that conflict. But what happens is that we have to find a way to balance here. And balance is essential for really achieving a fulfilling life. So when we're navigating things with that internal conflict, or excuse me, with our internal compass, we're allowing ourselves to be authentic and to navigate things in the best way to create the most peaceful resolution. And then one of our tools here, which I'll show you briefly, is our conflict styles decision tree. This will be in the presentation for you too, if you would like to use this at a further time. But basically what this tree does is it allows you to ask yourself a series of questions to de-escalate conflict. And this is something that you can, ask yourself, is this escalating? Is this urgent? What do I do from here? How do I facilitate the conversation? Is this something that I should just walk away from? And when you don't know what to ask yourself or what steps you need to take, you can reference this decision tree here to help you learn how to navigate those conflict style options, which were discussed earlier in this presentation. All right. And then I also have a table for you here, as another reference for you for resolution for legal versus interpersonal styles of conflict. And this just goes into a deeper thought process of legal versus interpersonal conflict with how to navigate that. What steps are best? What is done when it comes to legal resolution versus interpersonal resolution? All right. And I just want to thank you all so much for your time today. I do appreciate this opportunity to give you all some insight on the psychology of conflict. And I hope that you learned something today. If you have any questions or comments, just feel free to put them in the chat or reach out to me at a later time. I'm more than happy to help.
Thank you so much, Taylor. This has been fascinating and so much information in such a short period of time. Please, everyone, here's Taylor's contact information. Please feel free to reach out to her. Taylor, we were asked by certain people or a number of people in the chat, and there are a number of questions there. You will receive a copy of this, but
Thank you.
is it possible to get your PowerPoint?
Yes, I'll share the PowerPoint.
So people should just email you if you want and ask for it. Is that how you'd like to do it, or what would you suggest?
If you can send me a list of the participants from today, I can just send everyone a copy.
Okay, we can do that. That would
Thank
be
you.
fine. Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here. I'm sorry we don't have time for question and answers, but the information should prove so valuable, not just in our personal lives, but in our lives as peacemakers, dispute resolutionists, legal people, legal whatever we do. And thank you so much again. Have a good week, everyone. We'll see you next week, same time, same place, different Zoom link. Thanks so much. Bye-bye. Thank you,
Hi, thank
Taylor.
you.